Hello, everyone. Pat here again with another episode of CUBED, our podcast where we interview experts in the legal, regulatory, and AI space about what they're working on and ultimately helping us and our listeners learn three key takeaways about the space. I'm your host, Pat. I'm co founder and CEO at Abstract. And today I have the pleasure of talking with Sean, who I've known for quite a bit now, I think almost like 3 years. And Sean is an expert in a lot of things, including decaf coffee, which maybe we can talk about that at one point. But Sean, it's a pleasure to have you on. We have about 10, 15 minutes here. We like to keep these podcasts nice and punchy, but maybe a quick intro on your end for our listeners, and then explain what are you thinking about recently? What are some high level things that you've been focusing on? And spoiler alert, I think it has to do with geopolitics.
Huh. Thanks, Pat. Thanks for having me on. Yep, Sean West here. Nice to see everyone. I spent a lot of my career as deputy CEO of Eurasia Group, the big geopolitical shop. I then founded Hence Technologies, my first startup, a legal technology business. Out of that, we spun out the Unruly Corporation, which is a geopolitical AI company, and I wrote a book in the process about how politics, tech, and law are changing the world called Unruly. I spend a lot of my life thinking about how the world is multiple standard deviations away from what we ever expected. I mean, I uploaded a report I was working on actually about the Iran war, which started a few weeks ago, into an
Yeah.
AI, and it said this seems like a hypothetical scenario of a U.S.-Israel attack on Iran, and I said, no, this is real. Why do you think it's hypothetical? And they said, because this diverges so much from the history of these types of wars, this feels like it's hypothetical and not real. And that's the world we
Wow.
live in. I spend a lot of time thinking about living in a world that we couldn't possibly script right, and then figuring out how do we actually thrive in it.
Right, right. You've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and a lot of our discussions have been around, well, a lot of this work has been done, with boots on the ground manually, but you think like AI and software is, going to disrupt the way that we think about geopolitics and signals. Um, Maybe if you were to dumb it down for our listeners here, or thinking about another way, how can you enlighten us in a way that you think is easy to understand? Like, what do you think is changing here? Is it AI that's making this more feasible? Is it just software in general? Like, how's that disrupting your world?
Yeah, so I think there are a few trends that are converging at once on the geopolitical space. And so when we think about geopolitics, we're thinking about countries fighting with each other, but we're also thinking about domestic implications of political change. We're thinking about political risk more broadly. And I know, Pat, you spent a lot of time on the regulatory side of that, but like regulatory is downstream from political change. So you have to spend a lot of time thinking about political change. National governments exist in a world, right? Traditionally, the way this has been done is you hire the smartest humans you can, outsourced, right, from consulting firms. And I was one of these, or at least I played one on TV. And you would hire us, and we come in and tell you what we think is going to happen next, and we spin a really good and interesting story. And we are right way more often than we're wrong. Therefore, you make money and protect yourself. That's like the old school version. Over the
Right.
last 10 or 15 years, companies said, well, we're spending a huge amount of money hiring consultants. Let's just build this in house. So they started hiring one or two or three or four ex-intelligence people or ex-ambassadors or ex-government people to come in and build these policy and regulatory and geopolitical functions for them. So you had this in-source movement, and then they would supplement with, maybe it was expert networks, or they would supplement with like variable solutions. Sometimes they'd still maintain like a big external consulting relationship, but like they started doing a lot more of it themselves. But now you've got this third wave where actually tech is better in many cases and almost as good in all the other cases as the humans are at understanding what's happening in the world. For humans, it's very hard, forget about predicting the future. It's very hard to figure out what happened yesterday. It's like, how much time do you have to really understand what happened yesterday? AI can do that extremely well. So if it can do yesterday really well, it can probably do today pretty well, like real time. And if those things are true, then you have an edge at understanding the future against a lot of humans. And I think that I'm not anti-human. I'm not anti-expert.
Yeah.
I think there are roles that people and experts play. But I also think like a huge amount of the work that companies buy when they buy geopolitical analysis is ongoing monitoring of stuff that AI is actually pretty good at monitoring. And that's where I see a huge opportunity and a shift in the workflow. But there are a lot of, there's a lot of acclimation that needs to happen in the market for that to be okay. You gotta be willing to trust the AI. You've got to be willing to accept a human level of accuracy. It's not superhuman level accurate. I mean, maybe mathematically it is, but it's not perfect, right?
Right.
And if you can accept those things like you would accept them from a human, then actually you realize these tools are completely change the game for what's possible.
So a lot of what you're talking about is using AI to like filter, right, and distill what's relevant, or even just like catch up, right, on like what changed with um, everything in the last like 24 hours, right? And especially now, Iran and is a perfect example of like there's so much going on, right, hour by hour. So I feel like the other part of geopolitics, and correct me if I'm wrong, does depend on sort of information that may not be public, right? It's boots on the ground, people that have like sort of insider tips, etc. They know what's going on without publishing that anywhere. So I wonder how you think about that data, that part of the information, and maybe that's tied to this assumption that at the end of the day, those people have to use your software as well for it to be intelligent. Like, how do you think about that
Yeah. Well,
part?
look, I
Yeah.
think there are a couple of levels of this. Like number one, there's just a huge amount of insight in the world that you miss if you're not digesting everything. If you can't actually understand every language, if you can't understand every event that's happening, if you can't do that all in real time, you leave a lot on the table. So I'll give an example, right? Like when Iran said it was gonna, well, I don't know, they said they were gonna shut the Strait of Hormuz, they just started bombing ships, right? So when Iran effectively shut the Strait of Hormuz, everyone focused on oil. But in reality, like, almost half of many fertilizer components pass through the Strait of Hormuz. So suddenly, agricultural firms have like it's massive ramifications for ag firms and everyone who depends on them. Not immediately obvious. AI understood this the second that the strait was at risk, where all the humans are chasing the big thing, like who has the most money at risk? Oh, it's oil. Oil is like the biggest thing. AI is now doing the next 97 different
Right.
implications, right? Which is, I think, really, really important. Now, you talk about how there are geopolitical problems that only humans, like secret squirrel types, might have the
Right.
answers to, right? And that may be true, but the real challenge is like, what are the right questions to ask? And AI can be really good at prompting those questions. Now, I do think when it comes to many policy choices, and this is true at a national level and at a global level, there's no one who can give you the answer. There are a lot of different data points that you need to get, and you need to assemble yourself into a mosaic to decide what's likely to happen. When I would predict US politics, I would go and talk to all of the stakeholders 3 months before a big decision so I understood their reaction function. Because I knew even if I could call them the day that a bill was on the floor of Congress, they would be too biased. They wouldn't be able to see the other side was going to fold or the other side wasn't going to be able to fold. They just, like, partisan rancor just leads people to like hate each other. They can't see clearly. So even if you can call the president and say like, is this bill going to pass? Like the president doesn't necessarily know. But if you as the analyst are able to understand all of the forces at play, you do a really good job. Now, the question is with something like the Iran war, right? It's like, who are you going to call? Who's going to give you that? Who knows what's going to happen next? Nobody knows. It's a scenario where nobody knows anything, and everyone's best guess is as good as everybody else's. So what you're better off doing is actually focusing on what are the business crises I have today? How do I stem the bleeding? What are strategic opportunities? If I know my competitor is also facing the same problem as me, what if I do something drastic that will give me a long-term advantage today because I have the guts to do that? That ends up doing a lot more for you than predictions which you have to discount based on lack of confidence or whatnot. So there's a huge opportunity to use people in the field, but I actually think people in the field end up being more like sensors that provide inputs into systems that then process
Interesting.
this stuff more broadly.
Yeah, so you're saying like people in the field like will augment the work that um, you're already doing much better now with AI, but like that core part of analyzing how is this going to play out in, these different scenarios and impact supply chains, your products, your company, etc. That's done that's done poorly, or at least can be done so much better now with these AI models, where that delta in sort of increase in value is significant enough where like we don't even need to be talking about these boots on the ground just yet as
Yeah,
like
I don't know. I
necessary.
mean, look, if I want to be like a real tech bro about it, it would be like humans create data exhaust like all other data exhausts, and the machine will digest that exhaust and make sense of it, right? That's not really my full perspective. I think humans actually do have plenty of insight on a lot of things. Like if you want to
Right.
know which streets in Beirut are getting bombed and which ones aren't, like humans can tell you that very fast, right? If like you face like security issues that are an outgrowth of geopolitics, like your team gets kidnapped and you need someone to negotiate the ransom. Like humans are very good at doing that.
Yeah.
If you're trying to figure out like what my legal liability is from not moving people out of the Gulf, like humans are pretty good at that as well. So I think there's like a lot of roles for humans in this type of environment. I just like reject the premise that the only way to get insight is to talk to people about what they think. That's the
Right.
premise that I
That's
challenge.
yes,
Yeah.
that is not the only way to get actual insights, right, on what's going on. Almost the contrary. It's like that's like a nicer to have it to round things out at the end is sort of what I'm hearing. Um, so I guess talking about mindsets, my last question is, you've talked with a lot of professionals in the space that do it sort of like this older way, legacy way of doing it, and you've also talked with a lot of legal professionals. Um, how are mindsets shifting or not? Like
Yeah. Well, look,
what's like your biggest yeah.
I think that the geopolitical industry is like 18 months behind the legal industry, which is crazy to say
Oh
out
wow.
loud because like people don't think the legal industry is that innovative. But actually like I've written a lot about this over time. Legal is a pie that tech companies really want to win because it's so big. So there's just been like an absurd amount of money that's gone into the legal industry. And we're not talking about the highest valuation companies. We're talking about the 1,000 legal tech companies that all exist that are all solving parts of the problem that will get acquired or other people will copycat or whatever. Like legal is actually transforming. Might not be as fast as everyone expects, but the tools are there and there's an ecosystem to do it. Geopolitics, not so much. I mean, there's always been tech in geopolitics, right? Governments pay for a lot of tech to understand geopolitics, but it's never been commercial in a big way because commercial has always just wanted to rely on humans. And that's just what it's been. So I think that to me is like, that's the big opportunity and that's the big shift. Huh. Yeah. So I think legal's 18 months ahead of geopolitics in the sense that not that there are a couple of multi-billion dollar valuation companies in the space, but it's the 1,000 companies that are all solving edge cases and small problems in the space that'll get acquired or copied by everybody else if they're not successful in their own right. And I think lawyers are now waking up to the fact that like so much of their workflow can be automated, but they're looking at these tools. But geopolitics, even though governments have long invested in some forms of technology, the commercial industry just never has. And that's really the big shift. That's really the big opportunity.
So what does that mean? Do you think that conversations are going to go different sooner rather than later? Like you think people there's going to be more adoption and sort of geopolitical.
I think minds are open. So we are going into companies and telling them that we will build their full geopolitical tech stack, and companies are now engaged with what that means. This
Yeah.
is not this is the beginning of discovery for those companies, right? They're like, I need to understand what's in the market. I need to understand new ways of doing things. But a year ago, they would have told you like, we don't have budget for that,
Yeah.
right? But in
Yeah.
reality, I'm sure you think about it the same way. Like you can have operational expense for consultants all day long, but put a little capital expense on actually building a system that works for you, and that's a way better investment for you as
Oh
well.
yeah. That's I mean that's where everything's going to move towards, right? And then further automation from there, but I think we're a little ways out from having agents do everything.
Yeah.
But it's moving quick. So this is great, Sean. Sort of like recapping the three takeaways. I think like the first one for me is, there's all this similar to how what we do at Abstract with regulatory and legislative and social media noise is what we call it. There's a lot of noise in the geopolitical space that's going to impact companies, and so AI is like really good at filtering and deducing down like what's actually relevant and sort of mapping out scenarios. And then the second piece is people always talk about sort of boots on the ground, like this intel that is not available on the web, but there's so much more that you need to figure out first before that is also useful. And so that was really insightful. And then the last is that, minds are changing in terms of how AI can be applied to disrupt the way that work is done for geopolitical research and strategy. And so it's behind the legal market, but we think it's coming next. So hopefully I did a good job or not. You tell me in terms of like these three takeaways, but we'd love to hear if there's any last thing you'd like to share with the audience.
No, look, I think what we can do nowadays is truly stunning. And you're free to check us out at unrulycorp.com. And you can take a look at our full report looking at all the global ramifications of the Iran conflict at iran.unrulycorp.com. And that'll give you a flavor for like the art of the possible.
Amazing. And yeah, I was going to say you answered my last question, which is how people can learn more about what you're doing and where can they find information about you?
Sure. So you can certainly check us out on our website. You can also follow my Substack, which is available at blog.unrulycorp.com.
Awesome. Amazing.
Cool.
Well, this is great, Sean. Always a pleasure to have you on, and looking forward to doing this again soon. So
Sounds great. Thank you.
thanks again.